Hi, in this video I would like to explain in very simple terms the concept of shells and subshells and electronic configuration of an atom. The atomic theory started with Bohr postulating that electrons revolve around a nucleus much like planets revolve around the sun. So I'll take that as a starting point and then go to the valence theory. So here the nucleus is represented in the center, protons and neutrons are bunched together, and you can see electrons revolving around it in a single plane. So in the valence shell theory, the orbits were kind of grouped together. So you don't see a single orbit, you see orbits which are very close to each other, the yellows and the cyan blues. So let's look at a close-up here. So the nucleus is in the center, you have a single orbit with two blue electrons, but after that you get the two yellow orbits which are close to each other. You see three cyan blue colored orbits which are close to each other. So these groupings of orbits are called shells. So the orbit for the blue colored electrons, of course, is a single orbit, and the grouping of both these yellow orbits is one shell. The grouping of the three orbits of cyan blue color is one shell. So this kind of gives an idea of why it was called a shell. So let's look at a still image now. So the innermost orbit, which is very important and which has the blue electrons, is called the K shell. Although it is only one orbit, it's still called a shell. If you go to the next outer orbit, the yellow ones, you can see that it has two parts, an inner orbit of the yellow and the outer orbit of that yellow shell. So that shell is called the L shell, and we'll come to what's the name of the inner part of it and the outer part of it. The next outer orbit, the one in cyan blue color, is a grouping again, and it's called the M shell. The final outermost orbit in this particular image with the orange colored electrons is called the N shell. This is a rough representation. Real atom doesn't look like that. So now in the valence shell theory, they called each particular orbit as a subshell. So inside the shell you have subshells. So the first innermost orbit is of course just one, so it's called 1 S subshell, and the number 2 shows it can have a maximum of 2 electrons. The maximum allowable electrons in any subshell is mentioned on the top left corner of this image. Now coming to the next shell, K, then we had L, the yellow one, that has got two orbits. The inner orbit is called S shell. So you have the second shell, 2 for 2, S for S subshell, and again the small 2 shows it can have a maximum of 2 electrons. The outer part of the yellow shell is called a P shell. So it's the second shell, P subshell, and it can have a maximum of 6 electrons. Similarly, if you go to higher orbits, you can see D as well, and the D subshell can hold up to 10